Hey, I'm Bob at ILikeToMakeStuff. Today I want to figure out if it's worth it to make your own kitchen cabinets. Over the past couple weeks, we completely tore out my kitchen and built it back up to a blank slate. Now it's time to work on the cabinets. Now we made a Fusion 360 model of the entire space to try to kind of visualize how it was going to look, where things were going to go, but eventually you have to come into the real world. So I started putting some tape on the walls to figure out where the appliances go, and then we're going to work the cabinets around those kind of fixed points. So we've got some tape on the floor here as well, where I've measured and marked out the actual cabinet sizes that are going to fit in all these spaces. Now I get to make stuff for a living, so I have the opportunity to make these cabinets myself. But in this video, I want to help you figure out whether that's worthwhile or not for you. There are tons of options for this process, but we need to put some ground rules in place so we can figure out whether it's actually worthwhile or not. One is room scale. If you've got a tiny room with 2 cabinets, you're probably better off just buying some because that's going to be faster and easier and they're not that expensive. But if you have a really large kitchen, making them yourself can save you a lot of money, or maybe not. We'll find out. The other thing is the tools that you need to actually make the cabinets. There are tons of different ways to actually construct a cabinet, but you do need a few essential items. You have to be able to cut a straight line, drill a hole, and probably sand a piece of wood. So bare minimum, you got these 3 tools. Now of course the table saw is going to make it a lot faster and easier and more precise, but therein lies the problem. There are multiple ways to do this, and each one of these tools can have a different cost. Plus, hopefully you're using these tools for other projects as well. So we're going to leave the cost of the tools out of this whole equation and let you decide that part for yourself. Of course, there are a million different ways to do this, but we're going to cover 4 different ones to see if the DIY option is worthwhile. The first one is full custom. This is when you hire a kitchen designer, they come to your house, you tell them what you want, and then they figure out the entire thing, go away, get some cabinets made, come back, install them, and the only thing you have to do is hand them a really large check. And I mean really large. It's extremely expensive, but you don't have to do anything. The next option is semi-custom. Semi-custom could mean a lot of different things. Imagine you go to IKEA, you walk around and you look at the different styles you like, you pick out the different pieces you want, and you make a package out of those options. Or you go to a big box store, somebody that works there in the kitchen showroom will help you design the kitchen, usually for free, or you can use their online tools. A lot of the big box stores will have online tools that will let you lay out and pick an entire kitchen without actually 3D modeling. That can be really helpful no matter which one of these options you go with. The quality of cabinet you're going to get out of the semi-custom option is still a pretty big range, but it's probably going to be a lot nicer than right off the shelf. And by off the shelf, I mean literally taking a cabinet in a box off the shelf, bringing it home and putting it in your kitchen. This is a fantastic option, but you don't have as many customization options because these are generally pretty generic. You can usually get them finished or unfinished, but past that, you don't have a lot of control over what they end up looking like. Like I mentioned before, if you've got a small space that you're trying to fill, this might be the option you want to go with, but we're going to go with DIY. Even within that, you have a ton of options. You could build the boxes and buy the doors. You could buy the boxes and build the doors, or any combination. Let's jump in right now and build a really simple cabinet box so you can see how easy it is. When you're custom making your cabinets, you don't have to follow conventions. You can make them as deep or as shallow as you want to, but whatever size you decide on, you want to make sure that they are the same between all of your cabinets so that they line up correctly. To do this, I actually measured out one side panel and then put a piece of tape exactly where I want that line on my table saw to be, so I have a place to always go back to and it will be exact. You don't want any variation between these. To make the carcasses, I'm using maple plywood. It's nice and solid, good looking. And you could use anything here, but this is what I decided to use for mine. So let's cut these down to some side panels. We'll go from there. I cut out these side panels and I have just a little bit left over after cutting 4 of them from a single sheet of plywood. Now, I wanted to point this out. Typically, base cabinets are 24 inches deep. And if you add that up, plus the width of the 3 cuts you have to make on the blade, you shouldn't have any left over. In fact, your pieces should be a little bit short. But I decided to actually make all of these 23 7/8 so that they're a little bit short, and I can add a piece of homemade edge banding on the front face to cover up the plywood and also give a hardwood face to the front of all the cabinets. So I went ahead and ripped these down to 1/8 of an inch strips and then took that 1/8 off the depth of the cabinet. Next up, we're going to cut some dados in the side panels that we just cut, and that dado is going to accept the bottom panel. So it's going to slide into the side panel so it's nice and strong. We'll also glue and screw that together. But we need to cut those dados, and since I'm working with all 3/4 inch material, the dado needs to be 3/4 inch thick, and it needs to be half the thickness of the material deep. So we're going to take 3/8 of an inch here, that's half of 3/4, and set the depth of the dado blade to meet that. You always want to spin your blade just to make sure that you hit the high point for the teeth. Now that we've got that depth correct, we need to make sure that the distance between that dado and the bottom of the panel is the toe kick. Let's talk about that. So the toe kick on a cabinet is a place for your toe to go at the bottom on the front. And typically that's about 4 inches off the bottom, 3.5 inches in. Those numbers are kind of dependent on what you want to do, but that's what I'm going with for mine. So I want to make sure that the bottom panel is 4 inches from the bottom, and that will also give me the area where the toe kick's going to be. So we're going to measure off the side of the blade 4 inches to make sure that our toe kick area is here. Then we'll have the dado cut past that. If your table saw doesn't take a dado stack, if you're in Europe or something, you would probably want to accomplish the exact same process with a router and a bit. It's going to take a little bit longer, totally work though. Couple more things here at this stage. If you wanted to add any fixed shelving, you could go ahead and cut some more dados here to put shelves in. We're actually going to be mounting an oven in this, so I need to cut another shelf in 2 of these pieces. And I did want to point out that I picked the prettier side of the 2 sides to actually cut these dados into. That's because I'm going to finish, not paint, the inside of my cabinets. So the inside here is where the shelf is going to be. You're going to see this more, so I want to make sure that I got the pretty side, but the ugly side on the outside. Another option, if you don't want to do this cutout for the toe kick thing, is you could actually make a 2x4 frame on the floor, then make a simple box and set it on top, and then overhang on the front to get that toe kick area. Nailed it. I'm trying to miss the garbage can, in case you're curious. Yes. Cool. I got the sides cut, I got the bottom panel cut, and 3 stringers. I go ahead and do this every time just to make sure that they're all cut at the same time, the same width, and that's because I'm gonna need one on the top, on the back, one on the top on the front, and one lower down. Now I wanted to point out, I have a little method for the measurements here. I've got my main outside measurement, and then I take off 3/8 and 3/8, which is 3/4, and that tells me where the inside piece needs to be. That gives me the measurement for that. Then I take off another 3/8 and another 3/8, and that gives me the width for the stringers. I made a little chart, actually, because then I won't forget what number I'm working on. So I've got my outside dimension, I take off 3/4 of an inch to give me the floor, then I take off another 3/4 of an inch to give me the stringers. Before I start cutting, I write out all these numbers right here based on the outside dimension, and then we can start cutting and not worry about it. When I'm laying these out, because my table is not perfectly smooth, I line up the front faces and drive in one little brad here just to hold it there, and then I'll go back and actually screw it together so it's nice and strong. This is your basic carcass. Now it's just a simple box, but this is the point where you get to decide what you want these cabinets to look like going forward. There's two main types that you'll see, framed and frameless. Now, by framed, I mean building a face frame that goes on front of this that will give it dimension when you look at it from straight on. You can make this out of any material you want, any thickness you want, but that's going to limit the size of the opening that's inside this cabinet. And if you decide that maybe you want to have a drawer up here and doors down here, you want to build the face frame in between those to fill the gap. In the future, if you decide you want to change that orientation, you're going to have to change the frame as well. But we've decided to go frameless, meaning that we're not going to put that face frame on. We're just going to cover up this plywood with the edge banding that I talked about earlier. We'll get that put on, and then when we build the doors and the drawer faces, those are going to go almost all the way over, called a full overlay, to the outside edge, just leaving a tiny gap in between two cabinets. When I nail these on, I actually line them up on the inside with just a slight overhang that you can sand off, and the excess comes on the outside so that you can trim it off more easily. Last thing, if you wanted to add a toe kick down here just for added strength, you could put another stringer across there. We're actually going to hide some storage underneath the cabinets down there, so I'm not going to do that. The last thing on the carcass before it's finished is to fill all these little pinholes with some wood filler. I'm going to end up painting this front face and then clear coating the inside, so it doesn't matter that these are different species of wood to me. But if you're going to be staining or clear coating the entire thing, you may want to try to match up the species here and here just so it all looks the same. I finished up all the carcasses for that wall, for the island. I've still got all of those to do, but it's more of the same. I took everything outside and sprayed the inside of all of them with a polyurethane coat just to protect it. There's actually only 2 of these that are going to have doors. Everything else is going to have drawers, so you won't really interact with the inside much at all. Speaking of the drawers, I've got a whole bunch of these to build, and the way that I went about kind of keeping track of all the measurements is I measured the actual inside of each one of these areas and then came up with a labeling system. I labeled each carcass with a letter number, and then the inside will be 1, 2, 3. So all the parts for this drawer are labeled F1, this one's F2, etc. I've got so many to build that this will help me keep track and separate all the parts. All right, let's head down to the shop, start making some drawers. Before we do that though, let me show you this cabinet. This was made for the sink and it is a little bit different than everything else. We've got a big farm sink that's going to be pretty heavy, and so we had to kind of support the weight underneath. We've got 2 ledgers running across the sides out of 2x4, and then also pieces that carry that weight directly down to the bottom all the way to the ground. So this one is way more structural than everything else just to account for the weight. It's also got a cutout there in the back so that we could kind of slide it around the plumbing. But just know that there are a few cases where you're going to kind of have to special build a cabinet for a certain situation. There's a few different ways to build drawers. I'm not going to go over it in depth because there's a million videos about it. I'm just going to show you what I did. I'm using 3/4 inch plywood for all the outside walls, and then the bottoms of the drawers are actually different based on what's going to go in the drawer and the overall size of it. Most of them have 1/2 inch plywood bottoms. There are some that have 1/4 inch, and that's usually for the shorter drawers just to save on a little bit of space. I made a dado to match the thickness of the bottom in each one of these pieces, and then I've got some pocket holes on the end, so you just kind of glue and screw this whole thing together. Good to go. I got this one put together and I've got a couple more to do. Then we're going to spray polyurethane on all of these, the inside and the outside, and then we'll get them mounted on the drawer slides. We're doing full overlay doors and drawer fronts, so I want to make sure that these are mounted before we measure and put those on to make sure that we can get the gaps in between all of them the same. After about 2.5 weeks, this is the last of the lower cabinets we got to put in place, and this is the first of the upper cabinets. This giant thing is going to go on top of this one. They're going to be pushed in place, and then the only carcass that I have left is one to build across, connecting this one to the one on the other side of the fridge. Now, let me tell you, after 2.5 weeks, one of the big things that I've learned about making cabinets is that it is very repetitive and very tiring. So, as you're thinking about whether you want to do this for yourself, you have to take that into account. It's fun at first, and then it gets kind of old. finally got all of the drawers that I have made so far on slides. They're installed. That is a little bit tedious when there's a whole bunch of them to do, but it's not hard. It just takes a little time. I did also add a couple of toe kick drawers. Now these use a special kind of drawer slide that has a little spring in the end of it, so when you push on it, it releases and then pushes the thing out. So with your foot, you can open and close those, and you can use them for small storage, maybe for pans or something like that. We've put 3 of those in the kitchen so far. We're finally ready to start making some drawer fronts and some doors for all the cabinets we've been building, and I'm going to do this in a shaker style, and that means you've got some rails across the top and the sides and then an inset panel. I'm going to be using maple for the rails because they're going to be taking a beating, and I want the maple to hopefully make them last a little bit longer. The inset panel is going to be 1/4" MDF. That's going to paint really well, and it should be fine once all of this stuff is painted. You won't be able to notice that they're different materials. So to make these, I got a set of router bits. These are matching bits with 2 different profiles. And so you run all of the pieces to get this particular profile, then you run the ends of 2 of the pieces to add this little tenon so that you can snap all 4 pieces together. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I've already run all of the pieces through to get this profile, and they're using this first bit. Now I'm going to take these pieces and run them through the other bit to add the tenon to the sides, and then we can snap them together. Now I've done several tests on this already, and I've run into several problems, so I've had to redo pieces. When you run these pieces across these really big bits, there's a lot of opportunity for things to splinter, things to blow out, and so I've noticed that you should definitely put a backer piece behind these pieces as you're moving through so the back side of them doesn't get blown out. And then you end up with a cleaner cut. Now there's still a lot of things that can go wrong. Using a bit this big, you have to be really careful and take your time. Here's an example of one of the little things that can cause a problem that you just have to fix later on. When I went into the bit, it kind of scooped down a little bit before it touched the bearing, and so I've got this little notch in this, and that's going to be on the face of the door. I'm going to have to fill it with wood filler. It'll be fine, but it is an extra step that you have to do. You can avoid that just by being really, really careful and taking your time with the router. Now I'm going to try to mount these to these drawers that I made, and I did have to backfill the back of them a little bit with some extra piece of panel because I know that eventually I'm going to put a handle on here. I'm going to need to screw through this, and I want a gap behind it. So that is something I'm going to have to figure out for the rest of these before I move ahead. But to put these on, I'm going to put some double-sided tape onto the drawer, get these mounted correctly on that tape, then push them out and drive in some screws. Okay, so that's the first one, and I'm only putting in 2 screws for now because I'm going to have to take these off and paint them eventually. I'm going to go ahead and add these 2, but I don't think I actually need to finish the rest of these to be able to give you my thoughts on whether this was worth it or not. Obviously, I've got a whole bunch more of these to do, and I've got a bunch of painting and all that stuff, but I do have enough information now to give you my thoughts on whether making your own kitchen cabinets is worthwhile. There's 3 things I want to talk about that I think you're going to have to internalize for yourself because those are going to be different for you than they are for me. Now, like I mentioned before, I get to do this for a living, so I have the opportunity to make these and turn it into a piece of content that's hopefully valuable for you. That works in my favor, and that's not necessarily the case for everybody. All right, now there's one thing I want to point out before we actually get into this. I'm tired. I've been working more than full-time on this kitchen for several weeks now. It's a lot of work, and I want to point that out. I don't want to kind of brush that under the rug and let you think that this is just super easy. It's a lot of work. But there's 3 big things that I think are really important. The first one is whether you want to do this or not. There's a lot of people that are just not interested in making their own cabinets, but then there's people like me who just want to do it to have done it. That counts for a lot. Honestly, to me, that's kind of the most important thing. If you can afford to do it, great. If you want to do it, then you should do it. The second thing we need to talk about, though, is money. And this may be the biggest one to you, but honestly, I don't think it's the biggest factor here. We'll get to that in a minute. Early on in this process, we went to one of the big box stores, took our plan in, and they gave us a quote for doing not exactly this, but essentially the same stuff that I've already built here. That quote was over $14,000. Now, I still have some work to do, I still have some materials to buy, but so far I've spent $4,200 on everything that you see here. So you've got about a $10,000 savings even with the additional stuff that I have to spend. That's a pretty big deal. And if that's your main concern, then you absolutely will save money by building them yourself. But your time is valuable. Now, it doesn't matter what you do for a living, what kind of family situation you're in, your time is one of the most valuable things that you have in this life. It's finite, it's important, and it should be really valuable to you. So you have to choose where to spend that time. And if spending that time building a kitchen is something that you will enjoy, something that you find valuable, then you should definitely do it. But if you're gonna have to kind of force yourself to get through it, to spend all of your extra time making a kitchen just to save a little bit of money, I honestly don't think it's worthwhile. Now, I've enjoyed this process. I've learned a whole lot from it, and I'm, again, in the awesome position to where I can share this with you and kind of turn this into part of my job. But if I had to do this just on nights and weekends or take off time from work to make this kitchen, it absolutely would not be worth the money that I was saving rather than having somebody else do it. So when it comes down to it, this is all about priorities. If your priorities are just saving money, this is probably not the way to do it. It's going to be a whole lot of work and you're not necessarily going to enjoy the entire process. If your priority is building something and really getting into it and learning along the way, this is a fantastic project. Your priorities are different than mine and they're different than the other people that are watching this video. So you got to take all this information and anything else that you can find online, work it together, come up with your own equation, and figure out whether it's worthwhile for you. Now, if you want to see how the rest of these cabinets turn out along with the rest of the kitchen, because we've still got a whole lot of stuff to do, be sure to check out upcoming videos because we've got a whole lot of cool stuff coming. We've also got tons of other types of videos that you may want to check out, and if you're not subscribed, be sure to do that as well. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. There's where's everything else that's not really a ready?
If I cut together every time you say ready.
Ready? 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 All right, ready? 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 All right, ready?
Yeah.
Howdy ho, neighbor.